This is the month 2 update for my 40-gallon guppy tank, and unfortunately things haven't been going to plan. This is a photograph after the initial setup of the tank, and this is the tank right now. So originally I added 30 guppies to the tank last month, and unfortunately only 6 of them are left. Before I go any further, I just want to quickly say that I had all of these fish in my viewing booth prior to adding them to the tank, and I couldn't see any visual signs of infection when I first got them. With the guppies being the only fish in this tank, I was treating it as a pseudo quarantine tank as it was cycled, ready to use, and this was their long-term tank. As planned, I was doing a 30 to 50% partial water change on the tank every day to try and counter a potential spike in the bioload, as it's difficult to predict the exact bioload of 30 guppies when cycling a tank with Dr. Tim's ammonia solution. I lost the guppy I mentioned in last month's video within hours of putting the fish in the tank, and I did lose another one 2 days after that because it just wasn't eating anything, but other than that, things did seem to be going to plan. Fast forward a week and I noticed the signs of tail rot on one of the guppies, so I moved it to the viewing booth to get a closer look. I decided the fish needed some medication, so I built out a temporary quarantine tank to keep this fish away from the other guppies, and I started to dose Esha 2000. At this point, I think it's important to say that I'm in Europe, and many of the products you can get in North America are illegal here unless they're actually prescribed by a vet, so products like Esha 2000 are what we have to work with. Anyway, I checked the other guppies for signs of infection multiple times per day while trying to treat the quarantined guppy, but unfortunately it didn't make it. Fast forward a day and some of the other guppies in the tank are starting to show signs of tail rot too, so I decided to start a tank-wide treatment using Esha 2000. The day after that, I also noticed what I suspected to be a fungal infection seen on the right hand side of this guppy near its tail. Esha 2000 can be used for bacterial and fungal infections, and I've previously used it to treat fungal issues in my fish, so I just kept dosing it in the tank, but things just kept getting worse, and I noticed the fungal infection on the dorsal fin of this guppy the next day. By this time, I would guess 20 of the guppies were having issues with either tail rot or the fungal infection, with some of them having both, and the guppies did start to die. I also had to step in and euthanize 5 of the guppies over the course of about a week, as they were too weak to move laying on the substrate, and the amano shrimp in this tank were just eating them alive. There were multiple things that I did wrong with this tank that I wouldn't do again, but rather than going into it in this video, I will make a dedicated video on it soon, but the bottom line is I have 6 guppies left in this tank. The remaining red cobra guppy seems to have made a full recovery from its fungal infection, and the other remaining guppies are definitely on the mend. Rather than move the guppies from my 12-gallon tank into this tank like I originally planned, my current plan is to wait about a month to see if there's any other issues with these guppies and then move them into the 12-gallon tank. This will also let me move the fish from my 29-gallon tank over to this 40-gallon tank so I can debuild it and deal with the blackbeard algae issues that tank's having as well. I have soft water out of my tap, and moving forward I do want to try and stick with soft water fish rather than have to tweak the pH levels in the tank like I did with this one. And from my experience, it's definitely easier to increase the pH on the 12-gallon tank rather than this 40-gallon tank, so I do think that this will be the best move for the guppies. Moving on to the inverts in this tank, and my amano shrimp were having the time of their life this month, as the majority of the guppies died during the night, so by the time I wake up the shrimp had been feasting on their corpses. I did lose a couple of cherry shrimp, but this could have just been due to the temporary spikes in ammonia from the guppies dying during the night before I could do the water change. Another potential problem is that Esha 2000 does contain copper, and although it is labelled as shrimp safe, I was trying to dose it a little high to save the fish, and I would guess that the copper could have played a role in the issues with the cherry shrimp, but most of them are still here, and I haven't seen a single dead amano shrimp, so I'm guessing they're all still in the tank too. I've lost count of the number of shrimp molts I've seen in this tank this month, so I'm confident that the shrimp are able to molt without issue due to the mineral content in here, so I'm happy with that because I was a little worried that might be an issue. I also managed to finally find some horned neurite snails for sailors that were a pain to find earlier this year, and they've been added to the tank and they seem to be thriving. Moving on to the plants in the tank, and for the most part everything seems to be going well with the plants. I did remove the pogo stem and erectus and replace it with trimmings from my limnophilia, but both sets of the limnophilia in this tank are starting to turn a browny green colour. I'm not sure if this is due to dosing the medication in the tank, but I have had this happen to limnophilia in one of my other tanks and the plant did end up failing. So if these bunches do end up failing, then I'll probably just replace it with some type of rotala, as it's quickly becoming my favourite plant. Other than the Bacopa caroliniana, all of the stem plants in this tank have been trimmed at least once now, and for the most part all of the trimmings have been placed back into the substrate to increase the number of stems in the tank. I also started a second clump of the Ludwigia Mini Super Red using the trimmings from the first clump, and neither of them really grew much for a week or two after the original trimming, but they both seem to have rooted well and they are definitely grown now. The Bacopa caroliniana is showing signs of visible growth now, but it just goes to show how slow this stem plant actually is compared to everything else in this tank, as it's still tiny. The crypt field is starting to come along nicely, but the Petchii and Willisii crypts did melt a little bit when I was dosing the meds heavily, but it really wasn't as bad as the initial melt phases, and you can barely tell the difference between the plants now. This Cryptococcine tropica is the only plant in the tank that is lagging behind on its growth after the initial melt stage, but it is showing consistent healthy growth, so I'm actually really happy with it now. The 2 clumps of Java moss in the tank are growing really well, but the shrimp in this tank just don't seem to care about it compared to the shrimp in my other tank that are constantly on the Java moss. Most of the shrimp in this tank seem to just pick at food that's on the substrate or graze on the algae grown on the lava rock, so I might actually remove the Java moss and replace it with more crypts or some type of mini sword plant. The Salvinia has just been doing Salvinia things, and it's crazy how much of this plant I've actually thrown away this month, as I remove about half of it from its floating plant ring every time I do maintenance, and then 5 to 7 days later it's back to full. I upgraded the light on my Wallstad Beta tank this month, so I started to use its stock light as the grow light for the pothos on this tank, and it's drastically increased the growth rate. In around 10 days the roots have more than doubled in length, and I've got plenty of new growth coming off one of the marble queens. I also have this little runner coming off one of the other types of pothos too, so I'm curious how these grow moving forward with this new light. Just to touch on the water parameters for the tank, and the ammonia, nitrites and nitrates were all fine initially, but once the guppies started to die after about a week or two, the ammonia did see some temporary spikes up to 0.25 ppm, but the daily water changes did deal with that. One of the main problems with this tank is the pH, as I have soft water out of my tap and I've been using pH up to increase it to try and keep my guppies happy, but I really don't think the daily swings in pH from the water changes and redosing this have been helpful. I had a few people recommend I switch to crushed coral, and I did pick some up, but right now I'm only adding it to the 12-gallon guppy tank. The reason behind this is because it is pretty likely I'll move the fish from my 29-gallon tank, which are all soft water fish, into this 40-gallon tank, and pH up can be removed from the tank with water changes, but crushed coral can't. Anyway, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching guys, and have a good day.